The cold rain poured relentlessly from the darkened sky as thunder rolled like grief across the city skyline, and Ethan Cole, cloaked in a $1,000 overcoat, stepped out of his black limousine only to be struck by a wave of cold droplets that soaked him to the bone, matching the emptiness he carried inside after losing the biggest investor deal of his career. But before he could lift his coat over his head, a soft, trembling voice cut through the chaos like a whisper of hope. "Mister, you'll get sick." And he turned, puzzled, toward the direction of the voice, only to see a fragile figure standing at the corner of the building, holding out the smallest umbrella he'd ever seen. It was fraying at the edges and trembling in her tiny hands, yet she offered it to him without hesitation, her lips slightly blue from the cold but her smile warm enough to pierce through the storm. She looked no older than 6, her blonde curls damp and stuck to her cheeks, her pink raincoat stained and 2 sizes too large, her shoes soggy and worn, yet her gaze, those piercing, sky-colored eyes, shelled something Ethan hadn't seen in years. Genuine kindness, unfiltered by need or greed. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, frozen not from the cold but from the overwhelming wave of emotion that crashed over him, because something about her felt hauntingly familiar, like a page from a forgotten chapter of his life suddenly fluttering open again. "Why would you give me your umbrella?" he asked, his voice cracking in disbelief, as the rain trickled down his face like tears he refused to shed. She shrugged with innocence only a child could wear and replied softly, "Because you looked sad. And Mommy says we should share when someone's hurting, even if we have just a little." And Ethan's heart clenched painfully at her words, not just because of what she said but because of how she said it, so sure, so selfless, so full of something he had lost long ago. He took a knee in front of her, getting drenched in the process, but he didn't care, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find the answer to a question he didn't know he'd been asking. "What's your name?" he asked gently, his voice softer now, unfamiliar to himself. "Hope," she replied, almost like it was the most natural name in the world, yet it hit him like lightning, echoing in his ears and making his pulse race. Because Hope was the name he and Lily once whispered late into the night, dreaming of the future they never had. His mind reeled as he tried to convince himself it was coincidence, yet her face, her eyes, they kept him tethered to something deeper. "Where's your mommy now?" he asked, trying not to sound panicked, and Hope looked down at her shoes, her fingers tightening around the umbrella. "She's working. She always works, even when she's sick." And there was something about the way she said it that punched the air out of his lungs, as if her words carried the weight of stories left untold. A limo honked behind him, reminding him he was still the CEO of a billion-dollar company, but right now, none of that mattered. "Do you want a ride somewhere safe?" he offered, but she stepped back shyly. "No thank you, mister. Mommy says not to talk too long to strangers, even nice ones," and before he could ask more, she turned and began skipping away, umbrella barely covering her shoulders. Shoes splashing through puddles as if they were playgrounds, he stood there soaked, watching her disappear into the rain, and something inside him cracked open, something buried under years of boardrooms, deals, and betrayal. When his driver opened the door, Ethan didn't move, his mind replaying her voice over and over like a melody he couldn't forget. Why did she feel so familiar? Why did her smile remind him of a summer he once lived and lost? The rain couldn't wash away the ache blooming in his chest as he stepped into the car and stared out the window, searching the streets for her tiny silhouette. That night, he tossed and turned in silk sheets that brought no comfort, haunted by blue eyes and a name that echoed louder than the thunder. Hope, a name that now felt less like a stranger's and more like a missing part of his soul returning through the storm. As Ethan sat motionless in the back seat of his limousine, the city lights streaking past like blurred memories, he couldn't tear his mind away from the storm-soaked encounter that had just unfolded. The warmth of her tiny voice lingered louder than the thunder that had soaked his suit, and though the leather seats and tinted windows wrapped him in the illusion of comfort, his heart was far from still. When his driver asked if he was headed home, Ethan didn't respond. He was still watching the raindrops roll down the window as if hoping they'd spell out her name again, Hope. By the time he arrived at his penthouse overlooking the city, the storm outside had begun to calm, but the storm within him only grew stronger. Kicking off his shoes, he walked past the sterile perfection of a life he no longer recognized, the expensive art on the walls and the glowing screens unable to distract him from the girl who had refused his money with a sentence that echoed like scripture. "Mommy says helping someone doesn't need change, just heart." No one had ever turned down Ethan Colonneau for a business deal, not for a bonus, not for a tip, but she had, with the kind of grace that exposed every layer of emptiness he'd built around himself. Pacing the marble floor with his shirt still damp, he kept seeing her eye so blue, so innocent, yet filled with a wisdom that didn't belong in someone so young. The way she had looked up at him without fear, without expectation, had unraveled something deep in his chest, something long locked away. He found himself whispering her name, hoping if saying it enough times would bring her back to him, or at least help him understand why it hurt so much to let her walk away. Unable to sleep, he poured himself a drink, but the amber liquid did nothing to silence the ache. He replayed every word she said. Every glance, every drop of rain that fell between them. Why did her voice haunt him like an unfinished song? Why did her smile make him feel like a child again, desperate for something he couldn't name? As the night wore on, he walked into his office and opened his laptop, typing in every detail he could remember. Faded pink raincoat, about 6 years old, blonde curls, blue eyes, small umbrella, name. Hoping that somewhere in the digital noise of the city, he could find her again. His private investigator had found billion-dollar frauds before. Surely they could find one little girl. But the more he searched, the more he felt the growing pressure in his chest, because this wasn't about guilt or charity. This was something else, something personal. He realized it wasn't just her eyes or her voice or her courage that had shaken him. It was the way she made him feel seen, as if she looked right through the layers of his wealth and saw the boy he used to be, the one who once believed in love, in meaning, in second chances. And then there was that name, Hope, a name that wasn't random, a name that stabbed through time and pulled up the one memory he had buried beneath success and sorrow, Lily. She had once whispered that same name when they talked about having children, and now, years later, it had come back to him through a stranger's voice. Could it be possible? Could life be cruel enough, or kind enough, to cross their paths this way? The idea felt impossible, absurd. And yet, that aching sense of familiarity wouldn't let go. Frustrated and restless, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo album he hadn't touched in years, and, as he flipped through pages of smiles now faded by time, his hand stopped on one photo. Lily, smiling in a summer dress, her hair dancing in the wind, and those same eyes blue like the ocean after a storm. He stared at it, heart thudding, wondering if fate had just handed him a thread to the past disguised as a child in the rain. Sleep never came that night. Just sat by the window, staring into the dark sky, waiting for the dawn to break, hoping it would bring clarity. But deep down, already knowing that the moment she offered him that tiny umbrella, something inside of him had shifted forever. As the pale morning light crept across the skyline, Ethan Cole stood at the edge of his penthouse balcony, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the bustling city below like a man desperate to find one face in a million. And though the rain had stopped hours ago, the storm inside him remained, relentless and aching. By noon, he had summoned his head of security and tasked them with a mission that carried more urgency than any corporate crisis. Trace every street camera in the radius where he met the girl, review every frame, and find the child in the pink raincoat. Hours turned into days, and though they uncovered countless faces, none belonged to her. The girl named Hope remained as elusive as a whisper, as if the rain had washed her away like a dream he was never meant to hold on to. Frustration mounted with every dead end, and Ethan, a man used to solving multi-million-dollar deals in a single meeting, now found himself helpless in the face of a mystery tied not to logic, but to something deeper, something soul-bound. Then one afternoon, while scanning a city outreach report on his assistant's desk, a scribbled note caught his eye. Blonde girl. Pink raincoat. Seen giving soup and coats near 7th and Franklin Shelter. His pulse surged as he looked up and asked, "You've seen her?" And his assistant nodded, "I think so. A little angel. She shows up sometimes with bags of bread and old jackets. No one knows who she is." Without hesitation, Ethan changed into plain clothes, no suits, no watch, no guards, just a gray hoodie and jeans, hoping to blend into the street noise of humanity he'd long ignored. The closer he got to the shelter, the more the world looked unfamiliar. People with worn shoes and hopeful eyes. Street musicians trading melodies for change. And volunteers giving warmth with nothing more than a smile. And then, like fate bending toward his longing, he saw her, Hope, kneeling beside an elderly man in a wheelchair, gently placing a scarf around his neck, her eyes lit with purpose. her tiny fingers brushing dust from his coat as if he were royalty. Ethan couldn't breathe for a moment. She was real, not a vision, not a dream. She was right there, bringing warmth to a corner of the world no one noticed. He stepped closer, heart pounding, unsure what to say, unsure if she'd even remember him, but before he could speak, she looked up and smiled softly. "Hi, Mr. Rain," and something inside him shattered again, because she remembered, and she had given him a name that made the storm feel like a storybook. "You're here," he whispered, trying to sound composed, but his voice cracked under the weight of wonder. Hope stood and dusted her hands, her face calm, her presence still too pure for the chaos around them. "You looked sad last time," she said, tilting her head, "like Mommy does when she thinks I can't see," and her words pierced him deeper than any business betrayal or childhood wound, because they came from a place no child should have to understand: quiet sorrow, hidden pain, strength disguised as routine. Ethan knelt to her level, eyes locked on hers, trying to read more than words, trying to connect the pieces his heart already knew were forming a picture. "Do you come here often?" he asked gently, and she nodded. "Only when we have enough to share. Mommy says love is only real when you give it away." His throat tightened at that, not just from the wisdom in her answer, but from the clear echoes of someone he once knew, someone who had spoken those same kinds of truths years ago. "What's your mommy's name?" he asked cautiously, and for a moment, her eyes shifted, unsure, before she replied, "Mommy doesn't like telling strangers too much, but she's really kind. She's just tired a lot. Sometimes she cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping." Ethan swallowed hard, fighting the lump building in his chest, because he knew that kind of sorrow. He had caused that kind of sorrow once. "Do you live far from here?" he asked, hoping for a thread, but she shrugged. "We move around a lot. Sometimes the lights don't work. But Mommy says as long as we're together, we're home." Ethan felt his world tilt. This wasn't just an innocent child helping strangers. This was a little girl who knew sacrifice, who had learned how to hold others up even while standing on broken ground. "Why do you help so many people?" he asked, and she looked up at the gray sky before replying. "Because when I help someone, I feel warm. Like the sun still hiding behind the clouds. Just waiting." He didn't realize his tears had fallen until she reached out with her tiny fingers and wiped one from his cheek. No judgment, only care, like he was the one in need and she had plenty to give. Ethan didn't know what miracle had led him back to her, but he felt the gravity of it deep in his bones. This wasn't coincidence. This was the universe whispering loudly, "Look again, Ethan. Look closer." And though 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, only one thing mattered in that momentha had found hope again, and he wasn't about to lose her this time. Ethan knelt there in the quiet corner of the shelter's courtyard, the sound of distant footsteps and city horns fading beneath the weight of the moment, as Hope's tiny fingers pulled open the zipper of her worn backpack, revealing a collection of crumpled napkins, a purple crayon, half a sandwich wrapped in foil, and a folded envelope with little hearts drawn in the corners. She reached for the envelope and handed it to him with a shy smile. "I wrote you a thank you note, Mr. Rain," and as she did, something else slid out, an old, weathered photograph that fluttered like a forgotten truth to the ground. Ethan's eyes followed it instinctively, and when he picked it up, the time stopped because staring back at him was the face he had never stopped loving, even when he tried. Lily Harper, smiling in a sunlit garden, her eyes full of life, her hand resting gently on a piano, the image slightly faded but unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat, his fingers trembling as though he'd just touched a ghost, and a deep ache opened inside his chest like an old wound torn fresh. Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid the truth might collapse him entirely. Hope looked at the photo, then back at him with quiet honesty. "That's my mommy. She keeps that picture in a book. Sometimes I see her crying when she looks at it, but she always closes it real fast and pretends she's okay." Ethan felt like the world had tipped sideways, the noise around him muted by the roaring storm now surging through his heart. This wasn't just some stranger's child, this was Lily's daughter, and the resemblance was suddenly undeniable. The same shape of her lips, the soft curls, the fierce compassion radiating from every small gesture. "What's her full name?" he asked, though deep down, he already knew. "Lily Harper." Hope answered, and in that moment, everything shattered. Memories of college days filled with laughter, secret kisses beneath golden autumn trees, whispered dreams about children and the life they could build, and then the brutal silence that followed their breakup. No goodbye, no closure. Just a letter that never arrived and a love story that had never really ended. Ethan stood up slowly. His legs weak beneath the weight of revelation, the photo still clutched tightly in his hand as he stared at the little girl who had changed everything without even knowing it. "Does your mommy ever talk about your dad?" "Too?" he asked carefully, not wanting to scare her but needing to breathe through the fog of disbelief. Hope looked down at her feet, nudging a pebble with her shoe. "Not really. Sometimes when she's really tired, she whispers to herself. Once she said your name in her sleep." "I heard her," she said. Ethan. His name, on Lily's lips, still lingering in dreams. Ethan felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. "Hope," he said gently, lowering himself again so they were eye level, "do you know when your birthday is?" She nodded. "May 17th. He blinked hard, trying to steady the wave of emotion. He remembered that date vividly. It was the last time he saw Lily before everything fell apart, and now it was the day this little girl came into the world. The day he unknowingly became a father. Guilt hit him like a tidal wave. Years lost, birthdays missed, scraped knees not bandaged, bedtime stories never read, tears he never wiped away, and yet, here she was, still offering him an umbrella, still giving him a thank you note, still being everything he had never been allowed to know. "Can I meet your mommy?" he asked, barely able to contain the desperation now trembling behind his words. "She's sick," Hope replied quietly. "She works a lot and still gets really tired. I help her sometimes when she can't stand too long. But she says I'm her sunshine. So I try to be brave." Ethan's heart broke all over again. Lily had been carrying the weight of raising their daughter alone, fighting illness, working through exhaustion, and still raising a child kind enough to care for strangers. He wanted to scream, to cry, to go back in time and rewrite every moment he'd missed, but all he could do now was make it right somehow. "Hope, would you let me drive you home today? I promise I won't do anything scary. I'd like to see your mommy," he said, his voice shaky with emotion but full of honesty. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but only if I get to play music in the car. Mommy says music makes sad days better." Ethan smiled through the lump in his throat and reached for the car keys in his pocket, unaware that with each passing second, the invisible thread of fate was pulling him closer to the moment that would change his life forever. As they walked toward his car, hand in hand, the city buzzed around them, oblivious to the quiet miracle unfolding on the sidewalk. On photograph, one name, one little girl, and a love story reignited not by time, but by truth finally rising to the surface. As Ethan pulled out of the parking lot, the seat beside him no longer held just a little girl. It held an entire life he had missed, a secret carved in silence, a heartbeat he never knew belonged to him. He glanced over at Hope as she hummed a soft melody, tapping her fingers to the beat of a song playing through the car's speakers, unaware of the chaos unraveling inside the man driving her home. His grip on the steering wheel tightened with every red light, every memory clawing its way back to the surface like fragments of a love story never truly buried. Once Hope was safely dropped off at a friend's home where Lily had arranged childcare during work, Ethan gave her a soft promise, "I'll be back soon, sunshine," then turned the car and gunned it toward his office tower with the kind of urgency that came not from business pressure, but from the aching realization that time had stolen what he should have known and someone had let it happen. Storming through the glass doors of his penthouse suite, he ignored the stares of confused assistants and headed straight to the mahogany cabinet he hadn't touched in nearly a decade, where he pulled out a dusty black box he hadn't opened since his father's passing. The lock clicked open like the unlocking of a sealed past, and inside lay a stack of envelopes, some worn, others still sealed, all addressed in the delicate handwriting he'd once traced across love notes and birthday cards. Lily Harper. His breath caught as he realized how many there were. Dozens, each stamped but never delivered to his hands, deliberately hidden, locked away from him. With trembling fingers, he opened the first, dated only weeks after their separation. Lily's words spilled out like a waterfall of pain, talking about how hard it was to let him go, how she still believed in them, how she hoped someday he'd understand. One by one, the letters grew heavier. Descriptions of hospital visits, of her health declining, of her working double shifts to afford vitamins and food, of dreams fading quietly in dim apartments and lonely nights. Tears slid down Ethan's cheeks as he read words she had written in desperation, never knowing they would sit in silence inside a drawer while he believed she had simply moved on. Then, near the bottom, he found one envelope, frayed and slightly smudged, sealed with a sticker shaped like a hearth. His hands shook as he opened it, and as his eyes moved across the final page, the world seemed to collapse inward. If you ever see a girl with my eyes and your heart, just know, she's yours. The air left his lungs, and a cry escaped his throat, raw and broken, as he realized the full weight of what had been stolen from him. Not just years with Lily, but moments with his daughter. Her first steps, her first words, her fears, her dreams. Every laugh and tear he had never been there to witness. The realization burned through him like fire. His father, the man he had once tried so hard to please, had robbed him of a family out of pride, control, and selfishness. Grief and rage collided inside him as he threw the lid of the box across the room and collapsed into the nearest chair, burying his face in the last letter like a man mourning something he hadn't known he'd lost until it was far too late. He sat there for hours, silent, the city lights flickering behind him like echoes of a world that kept moving while he stood frozen in regret. But when the wave of sorrow finally settled into resolve, he stood again, not as a CEO, or a businessman, or a billionaire, but as a father who had found the missing piece of his soul and now had a second chance to put things right. Grabbing his keys, he raced to his car once more, this time with a mission burning so fierce it drowned every distraction. He had to find Lily, had to see her face again, had to tell her he knew, that he was sorry, that he would never leave her or hope again. He called every hospital in the area, his voice growing more desperate with each unanswered transfer, until finally, a soft-spoken nurse said, "Lily Harper?" "Yes. She's here. Inpatient. Room 204. Been in and out with complications. Poor thing's all alone." Ethan didn't wait for further details. Tires screeched as he tore down the avenue, adrenaline pumping like a second heartbeat in his veins. He had missed 6 birthdays, 6 Christmas mornings, 6 years of bedtime stories, but he would not miss this moment, not another minute of their lives. The rain had started again, but this time he didn't notice, didn't flinch, didn't care, because with every second that passed, he was one step closer to facing the truth. And one heartbeat away from seeing the woman who had waited, silently, faithfully, through all the years he'd been kept away by lies. The hospital hallways smelled of antiseptic and faded sorrow, its flickering fluorescent lights casting pale shadows across linoleum floors that had seen too much quiet suffering, but Ethan barely noticed any of it as he pushed past nurses and ignored clipped instructions from staff, his entire focus anchored to the room number etched in his mind, 204. Every step closer felt like a lifetime, every beat of his heart echoing with memories, with guilt, with fear of what he might find behind that door. When he reached it, he hesitated only for a second before slowly pushing it open, and the sight that greeted him nearly brought him to his knees. There she was, Lily Harper, pale and fragile beneath a thin hospital blanket, tubes in her arms, oxygen clipped to her nose. Her eyes closed as if dreaming of a life that had never been stolen from her. For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't reconcile the vibrant woman from his memories with the one now lying still under blinking monitors. But then she stirred slightly, sensing his presence, her lashes fluttering open to reveal the same soul that once taught him what love truly meant, and the second her gaze found him, her entire face froze. "Ethan," she whispered, as if saying his name might break the fragile thread keeping her heart beating, and he stepped forward, voice cracking as he fell to his knees beside her bed, taking her cold hand in his own. "I didn't know. I swear to you. I didn't know any of it. Not the letters, not about hope. Not you being sick." His words came out in shudders, every syllable soaked in remorse, and she just looked at him for a long, aching moment before tears slipped down her cheeks, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much alone for far too long. "I tried," she murmured, her fingers trembling in his. "I tried to tell you, but he kept everything from you, didn't he?" And Ethan nodded through the flood of emotions. "My father. He stole our time, Lily. All of it. I should have looked harder. I should have never stopped searching." Her lips curled into the faintest smile despite the pain, and she whispered, "You're here now, that's all that matters." But her voice quivered with the truth they both understood: time wasn't guaranteed, not anymore. A sudden beep from the heart monitor made Ethan flinch, and a nurse stepped in, checking her vitals, adjusting her then quietly muttered something to the attending doctor outside before returning with a clipboard. The expression on her face was the kind that didn't need words, born from delivering hard truths too many times. "We need to talk," the nurse said gently, and Ethan stood, bracing himself. They led him into the hallway, and the doctor's voice was calm but clinical. "Her heart's failing faster than we expected. Stress, overwork, untreated conditions. She's held on longer than most would. We can stabilize her for now, but what she really needs is an advanced surgical procedure, something only a specialized team abroad can offer, and it's not covered by public insurance." Ethan didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't ask for cost or timeline. His answer came before the doctor could finish: "Whatever it takes. I don't care what it costs or where I have to fly her. She gets it, today. I'll make it happen." The doctor nodded with guarded optimism. "We'll prep the transfer. But we need her stable enough to fly. Hours matter." Ethan returned to her room with renewed urgency, sitting beside her as if his presence alone might keep her heart beating, his thumb brushing softly over the back of her hand. "You're not leaving me again," he whispered. "Not now, not ever. I lost you once. I won't survive losing you twice." She smiled weakly, eyes glistening. "Ethan. We have a daughter," and he nodded with tear-filled pride. "I know. She's everything, Lily. She's got your kindness, your strength, your eyes." And Lily chuckled softly, her voice barely audible. "She's got your stubborn heart." And in that fragile laughter, years of pain began to dissolve. Hope arrived moments later. Her little backpack slung over one shoulder, a handmade card tucked under her arm, and when she saw her mother in bed and Ethan beside her, she paused, confused by the image but drawn into it instinctively. Lily opened her arms, and Hope climbed in gently, careful not to disturb the wires, curling into her mother's side, as Ethan placed an arm around them both, his family, broken and bruised. But finally in the same room, together, Lily looked up at him through tired eyes. "Promise me, Ethan. If I don't make it, promise you'll take care of her," and his voice broke as he leaned down, forehead against hers. "Don't say that. You're going to make it. I'm not just going to take care of her, I'm going to give you both the life I should have from the start." The beeping continued steadily, a rhythm of hope echoing in the room as Lily closed her eyes again, exhausted but no longer alone. And in that fragile moment, surrounded by sterile walls and blinking machines, Ethan made a vow that no power on earth could shake. He would fight for Lily's life with every resource he had, because some things were more sacred than fortune, and no amount of money could replace the years already lost, but it could save the ones still ahead. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, painting soft streaks of gold across the sterile white walls, Ethan stood by Lily's bedside with a phone pressed to his ear, barking rapid orders to his legal team, aviation contacts, and international medical advisors, his voice low but fierce with urgency. There was no time to hesitate, no space for doubt. Lily's life hung in the balance, and he was determined to pull the world's best resources into one place to save her. Within hours, his private jet had been converted into a flying ICU, and two of the top cardiologists from Zurich and Boston were already en route with a medical flight team prepared for mid-air emergencies, custom equipment, and a prepped surgical suite at the most advanced cardiac hospital overseas. Ethan spared no cost, no pause, no breathless days as a ruthless CEO were behind him. Now he was just a man trying to keep the woman he loved alive and hold on to the daughter he had just found. While doctors began stabilizing Lily for transfer, Hope refused to leave her mother's side, curled on the edge of the hospital bed with her small hand wrapped around Lily's fingers like an anchor keeping her grounded to this world. "Daddy's here now," she whispered over and over, her voice soft and trembling but stubborn as sunlight. "Mommy, don't go to heaven, please, stay with us." Ethan stood behind her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, silently begging the universe to grant their family another chance. Hours passed like lifetimes, medical teams moving in synchronized urgency, nurses weaving through corridors with quiet determination, and finally, the moment came. Lily was wheeled toward the surgical wing, her eyes fluttering open just enough to lock with Ethan's one last time before the double doors closed between them. "I'll be right here," he whispered after her, even though she could no longer hear it. And as the gurney vanished into the bright light of the operating room, Ethan dropped to the nearest chair and lowered his head into his hands, the weight of helplessness pressing down like never before. Beside him, Hope crawled into his lap, clutching the photograph from her backpack, the same one with Lily's smile captured mid-laughter, and pressed it to her heart, as if somehow the image alone could hold her mother here. Ethan wrapped his arms around her tightly, resting his cheek against her hair, and for the first time in years, he prayed not with formality, not with rehearsed lines, but with a raw, desperate pleading from a man stripped down to nothing but love and fear. "Please. I don't care what it takes," he murmured into the silence. "Take my name, my money, my life if you want, but give her back to us." Time slowed, every second stretching unbearably, the hallway around them eerily quiet except for the occasional beeping of machines and distant calls over the intercom. Nurses passed by with gentle glances, but no one spoke. Everyone seemed to feel the sacred stillness of a moment where a family's fate hung suspended. Hours passed, one bleeding into the next, and Ethan felt every tick of the clock as if it carved into his chest, until finally, footsteps echoed from the surgical doors and the lead doctor emerged, removing his mask and cap, his face unreadable for a split second before it softened into the first real smile Ethan had seen in days. "She's stable," the doctor said gently, voice laced with relief. "The procedure was long and delicate, but she's going to be okay." The words hit Ethan like thunder, and he stood frozen as Hope gasped, "Mommy?" Her eyes wide, fingers clutching his coat as if afraid to believe. The doctor nodded. "She'll need rest and recovery, but she's out of danger. She's strong. Stronger than most we've seen." Ethan exhaled for the first time in what felt like eternity, his knees nearly buckling as he pulled Hope into his arms, both of them shaking from the rush of emotions that could no longer be held in. Tears streamed down his face as he buried his lips in her hair, whispering, "She's coming back to us, sunshine. She's staying." Nurses smiled as they passed, moved by the quiet miracle in front of the man once hardened by business, now brought to his knees by love, a child whose soft prayers had pulled her mother through the edge of death, and a family that had been torn apart by silence finally beginning to heal. Later, as they were allowed to see her, Lily lay asleep, her chest rising with gentle rhythm, color slowly returning to her cheeks, and Ethan sat beside her, one hand holding hers, the other wrapped around Hope, whispering promises into the quiet promises of mornings filled with laughter, of never missing another moment, of birthdays and bedtime stories and long walks in parks filled with light. And in that still room, time stopped, not in fear, but in reverence for a love that had defied all odds and survived the storm. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Ethan's mansion like warm memories finally coming home, casting golden rays across marble floors that once felt cold and lifeless but now echoed with the sound of little feet and soft laughter. Weeks had passed since Lily's surgery, each day a miracle stitched together with slow breaths and gentle care, and Ethan remained by her side through every moment, feeding her soup, adjusting her pillows, reading old books aloud with trembling voice, and watching her healing become the rhythm of his days. The transformation was not just medical, it was emotional, spiritual, the shedding of an old self built on ambition and isolation, now replaced by something humbler, deeper, realer. Lily, though still fragile, smiled more now, soft, grateful smiles that came from seeing her daughter safe and watching Ethan carry her like a man who had lost time and was now making up for every second. And when the doctors finally gave the green light for her to return home, Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned his sleek, glass-cold mansion into a home that breathed warmth. The empty guest wing became Hope's wonderland, painted in soft pinks and pastels with stars on the ceiling, fairy lights across the windows, and a hand-built bookshelf lined with storybooks and teddy bears that seemed to multiply overnight. Lily's room overlooked the garden, now filled with lilies and lavender, her bed nestled near a sunlit nook where Ethan placed a record player and her favorite blanket from college, the one she used to curl into on rainy nights when they were young and in love. And when Lily was wheeled inside for the first time, she looked around, stunned, her eyes watering at the thoughtful touches, the photo of them from years ago framed on the mantel, her piano restored in the corner, and the scent of her favorite chamomile tea already brewing in the kitchen. Hope wandered through the halls like Alice discovering her own wonderland, stopping to marvel at every corner, every drawer, every window, until she opened the door to her new room and gasped audibly, her small hands flying to her mouth as she took in the twinkling lights, the giant unicorn plushie sitting in the reading chair, the mural of clouds painted behind her bed. Ethan watched from the doorway, heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Later that night, after stories had been read and pajamas had been put on, Hope climbed onto his lap by the fireplace, wrapped in a soft blanket with sleepy eyes and her favorite bear under one arm, and she looked up at him with quiet wonder, whispering, "This is what it feels like to be safe, huh?" And her words shattered something inside him, in the most beautiful way. His arms tightened around her, his throat catching as he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, tears slipping down his cheek as he replied, "Yes, baby girl. This is exactly what safe feels like." And in that moment, the house no longer felt too big or too cold. It felt like family. After she drifted to sleep against his chest, he carried her to her bed with a reverence he'd never known before, pulling the covers over her like she was the most sacred thing in the world, then walked quietly to Lily's room, where she sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl, her face lit by the moon. Ethan knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. Eyes filled with emotion as he said, "You gave me a daughter, Lily, you gave me everything, and you never asked me for a single thing in return. I owe you forever," and her eyes glistened as she reached out and touched his cheek, whispering, "I never wanted anything but for her to know love. And now she does because of you." He lowered his forehead to her hand, overwhelmed by the weight of gratitude and grief and joy all crashing together, and she gently stroked his hair, just like she used to when they were young and everything was still ahead of them. "We have time now," she said softly. "Not just for her, but for us too," and those words lit something inside him he hadn't dared to hope for, the idea that maybe, just maybe, love could grow again from the ashes of everything they lost. Outside, the storm clouds that had hovered for so long had finally cleared, the sky wide and open and waiting, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like he was running from the past or drowning in regret. Felt present, anchored, alive in the beauty of what he had been given, a second chance, a little girl with eyes like heaven, and a love that had survived time, silence, and pain to find its way home again. The morning air was crisp and clear, the kind that carried the scent of blooming lavender and fresh-cut grass, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan didn't rush into his tailored suit or check his email before breakfast. Instead, he stood barefoot in the kitchen flipping pancakes shaped like stars and hearts while Hope danced around in her pajamas, giggling every time one landed crooked. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness now sang with life, laughter, and love music pouring from the grand piano, where Ethan had begun teaching Hope simple melodies, her tiny fingers learning where joy lived in each key, her giggles filling the halls as he pretended to mess up just to make her laugh harder. Every afternoon, they built pillow forts in the library, or planted flowers in the garden while Lily watched from her favorite chair on the patio, her smile growing stronger with each passing day, her color returning, her spirit no longer weighed down by pain or fear. Ethan had stepped away from boardrooms and board meetings, choosing instead to lead bedtime stories, nature walks, and baking disasters that left the kitchen covered in flour and love, and every night as he tucked Hope into bed and kissed her forehead, he felt a new kind of success, not measured in numbers, but in the quiet rise and fall of her breath, the way she whispered, "Love you, Daddy," before drifting to sleep. But it was during one evening walk beneath the dusky pink sky, hand in hand with Lily through the garden he designed just for her, that Ethan stopped beneath the arbor of white roses, turned to her with eyes full of everything he never got to say, and reached into his pocket to reveal a delicate ring crafted with a sapphire. Hope had picked herself, nestled between two diamonds. Lily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her heart pounding as Ethan lowered to one knee and said softly, "I didn't just lose time, Lily, I lost you. Let me spend the rest of my life giving back what we missed. Will you marry me again, for real, for forever?" Her answer came in a cascade of tears and a whispered, "Yes, yes, Ethan, I never stopped loving you," and they held each other beneath the stars, the garden glowing with string lights as if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment. The wedding came 2 weeks later, intimate, simple, and beautiful in every way that mattered, held beneath that same arbor now blooming with roses. Hope had helped water daily. Guests gathered in quiet awe as Lily walked down the garden path in a soft ivory dress, her arm linked with Ethan's as Hope skipped ahead in a pale pink dress, carrying a tiny pillow with 2 gold bands tied in silk ribbon. As the ceremony began, a hush fell over the crowd, And when the moment came for vows, Ethan's voice trembled as he said, "You saved me, both of you. From loneliness, from emptiness, from forgetting what matters. I promise I will never take a single breath for granted again." Lily, tears glistening, replied, "You are my peace. You gave our daughter a father. And you gave me back my heart." Then came the ring exchange, and Hope stepped forward with the kind of pride that made every guest wipe their eyes, holding out the rings with shaking little hands and beaming, "Now I have a forever mommy and daddy." And the entire garden broke into soft laughter and sobs. They kissed beneath a sky that had once held so many storms but now held only light, and as petals rained down and violin music played, the family that the rain had once pulled together now stood united in the sunshine, no longer broken, no longer lost. Within days, word of the quiet garden wedding spread, and soon the media caught hold of the story. Millionaire CEO, changed by a child's umbrella. And headlines spun across the internet with pictures of Ethan smiling beside Lily and Hope, no longer the cold business mogul but a man whose heart had been rewritten by kindness, fate, and a 6-year-old selfless gesture in the rain. Interviews poured in, but Ethan declined most, choosing instead to release a single statement: "True wealth isn't measured in profit, but in the people who wait for you at home, and the little hearts who remind you who you are." Overnight, people began calling it the umbrella miracle, and letters flooded in from all over the world, families reconnecting, children reaching out, strangers offering prayers and stories of their own healing. Ethan read every one with Lily by his side and Hope curled in his lap, and the mansion that once felt like a fortress of solitude now beat like a heart, full of warmth, memories, and the quiet sound of healing. And on the anniversary of that rainy day, they walked together through Central Park, Hope holding both their hands and swinging between them, and Lily whispered, "I used to believe storms took everything, but now I know sometimes they wash away what's fake, and bring back what's real." As Hope skipped along the park path, her small fingers wrapped around Ethan and Lily's hands. The sky above shone in brilliant blue, no storm clouds, no rain, only sunlight that felt like a blessing, as if the universe itself had decided this family had weathered enough. The echoes of laughter faded into stillness that evening, and while Hope colored at the dining room table, humming softly to herself, Ethan sat across from Lily in the soft lamplight of their study, papers spread before him, but this time not business contracts or investor deals instead. It was the charter for something far more sacred. The Hope Foundation, named not just after the little girl who saved him, but after what she brought back into his world. "For children without homes," Ethan said, tapping the mission statement with gentle conviction, "and for single mothers who carry the world on their shoulders, just like you did. No one should be alone like that again." Lily nodded, emotion clouding her eyes as she took his hand, seeing in him not just the man she once loved, but the man who had transformed, who now used his wealth not for power, but for purpose. Within weeks, the foundation launched with a gala not of glitz, but of meaning. No red carpet, no designer vanity, just stories, survivors, and lives ready to be rebuilt. Videos of Ethan sharing his journey aired across networks, but it wasn't his tears that captured the world's heart, it was his words. "It wasn't the rain that broke me. It was her heart. And that heart was mine all along." Those 12 words swept the globe, replayed in classrooms, on talk shows, in shelters where children watched and whispered that maybe the world still had magic. Social media exploded with tributes, strangers posting umbrellas on doorsteps, chalk hearts on sidewalks, and using the hashtag #BeHope for one little girl's act of kindness had ignited something far beyond her small arms or soft voice. Ethan used the attention not to build his brand, but to break down walls, investing millions into shelters, transitional housing, and programs that gave not just food or beds, but dignity, education, safety, and love. Lily joined him at every step, speaking to mothers whose stories mirrored hers, her words offering something money couldn't. Understanding. Hope, still unaware of her global fame, continued to draw rainbows, help set the table, and hum as she brushed her doll's hair, her innocence untouched, her world filled with the love she'd once only dreamed of. One afternoon, while Ethan spoke at a community center ribbon cutting,